You know, radio is a prime medium for repetitive gimmicks.
Yeah, like a show about boring things with really contrived and pre-written intros.
I'm Ezra,
I'm Grayson.
and this is Are We Doing This Right on WEGL 91.1 Auburn.
It's nice
So,
to be back.
yeah, this week we're going to be talking all about gimmicks. That's a real fun one.
Oh yeah, my favorite show topic.
All right, so I'm going to get us started with 4D cinema. And so you know what 4D cinema is, right?
Right, I've been on the Shrek ride at Universal.
Exactly. That's a great example. So just as 3D cinema is, a movie with these things that pop out at you, 4D cinema is the same principle, but instead of just visuals popping out at you, you also have like water being sprayed on you or like smells. It's a very broad term.
Right, it's everyone's favorite iteration of this art form that we call movies.
Oh, yeah. So 3D movies have been around since the 20s. I didn't realize they'd been around for that long.
Yeah, that seems strangely early, but I guess it makes sense for like the time when it would have been kind of more novelty.
Yeah, and
to
you had
movies.
those really cool retro like red and blue 3D glasses that are like kind of like a fashion statement now.
Right.
Yeah, that was the original 3D movie. And there's always been this kind of like nuance, this back and forth on if 3D movies add more artistic depth. But, there's not any nuance on 4D movies. Everyone's kind of in agreement on that one. They're just gimmicks.
Yeah, they're just, they live in theme parks and nowhere else.
Yeah. So the whole like principle behind it is to kind of extend the suspension of disbelief like a step further. But in practice, it's kind of the opposite. It pulls you out of the movie. It makes, I don't know, it's, I guess, the opposite of that.
You're much more aware that you're just kind of sitting in a chair.
Yeah. But I guess I could kind of see potential in it as things progress further. Eventually, it might emphasize, it's kind of like it's in the uncanny valley of 4D right now.
Yeah.
So the first 4D cinema, it happened a solid 60 years after the first 3D cinema. And there was this abandoned power plant in, I think, Los Angeles. And of all things, Six Flags acquired it.
So, okay.
And I can't remember what they called it, but the movie was called The Sensorium. And it was like they didn't try to cover up or like remodel the power plant. It looked like a rundown power plant.
Can we back up a little bit? When was this?
I think 86.
That late, and Six Flags was just buying old power plants and setting up attractions in them?
Oh, yeah. And so you had the Sensorium, and it was this feature film kind of on like the American pastime and like the coming of, I don't know, like new technology. And it was kind of tasteful. It was told this, they kind of based it on Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne.
Right.
Very, very, very loosely. And they had this crazy inventor talking about all like the future of technology, and you get like water sprayed on you and stuff like that. It was real novel. They didn't have, how like the current iteration of 4D movies, like the chairs will like move in time with what's going on screen.
Right.
The first iteration of that, the chairs would just shake really hard until you almost fell out of them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Why did we ever try anything else?
I have no idea. So after this, I guess, trend got started, Disney got on board and they created the infamous Captain EO, starring Michael Jackson and written by George Lucas.
Oh, wow.
And that turned out about how you think it would. I don't know, like a surreal sci-fi adventure. I use the term adventure very loosely. And Michael Jackson just kind of doing his thing, and it was really, really over the top. I don't know any other way to describe it.
I've heard of this before, kind of very cursory, just as one of those legendary bad things that happened with Disney.
Oh yeah, they actually brought it back after Michael Jackson's death. Between 2010 and 2015, you could experience it yourself. I did, and it was just kind of surreal. Like all I really remember is a bunch of flashing lights. It was like Thriller mixed with like Tron. Strange.
I want to clarify for any of our listeners, that's surreal as in this doesn't make any sense and I'm not sure if I like it or not sense of the word.
Exactly. So Disney didn't stop there. They were, I guess, the pioneers of this newfound form of cinema. and they created what I consider to be the only, I guess, good 4D cinema experience, and that would be Muppet Vision 4D.
Oh yeah, that's 4. I guess that is 4D.
It
Yeah.
is 4D. So the whole thing behind this idea, it was a similar attraction to Captain EO, but rather than trying to like play up 4D cinema as this hyper realistic experience, it was just really self-aware about how much of a gimmick it was.
Right. Right.
And it was actually Jim Henson, the guy who made the Muppets and Sesame Street. It was his last project before he died. One of them. The ride was actually finished. Like he recorded and directed the video, and then he died, and then they finished the ride without him. But I don't know. It was kind of like his last, I guess, like touch to the world, and I really like it, honestly.
See, I didn't know that ride was even that old. That's one of like my favorites.
It
in
feels
Disney.
pretty modern, yeah. So after this, Disney continued it. They had, if you've ever experienced the Bugs Life one at Disney, it has, I think, my least favorite thing in 4D cinema, and that would be the realistic sensation of bugs crawling underneath you.
Yeah.
A big step up from the chairs shaking so hard you fall out of them from Six Flags Power Plant.
See, this is weird. You've just kind of pointed something out to me that I hadn't even thought of a lot of these things that Disney does as 4D because I'm so used to you're sitting in chairs that are moving around and getting sprayed with water occasionally look of 4D. I hadn't even thought of it like that.
It's just kind of taking the same principle and trying to make it a little bit less gimmicky and a little bit more of an actual like ride or experience.
Right.
After that, you had like Disney's PhilharMagic, which I guess that's more of a traditional 4D one, but it did feature 3D adaptations of classic 2D Disney films, which was kind of novel. I think that was the early 2000s when they came up with that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And after that, that's when all the other major studios came around, and that's how you got the infamous Shrek 4D.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this the wrong way around. The bad part came after the high effort ones.
Exactly. So, we think of this stuff as just like complete novelty, mostly because each ride has to be like from the very beginning, it has to be like built from the ground up. And so you can't exactly churn these things out. You have to make your custom scent sprays, and you have to like mount your water cannons and whatnot for each of these rides. They're not exactly something that just gets thrown together in an hour. So that's why you really only see them in amusement parks. However, that's in North America.
Oh.
In Korea, Japan, China, and pretty much just those three, but a few other Asian countries, it's kind of caught on as a little bit more of an art form. And while they're not making their own original 4D films, they're getting full adaptations of like movies in 4D. Avatar, the one with the blue people, to clarify,
Right.
and Iron Man 3 both got full 4D adaptations not too long ago.
So how long would these be running that, they can
the
afford
full
to do
duration
that?
of the movie, like 2 hours.
No, like in the theater, like how long would these be in place?
Well, it wouldn't be at every theater. It would only be in like capitals or like big cities like Hong Kong. But to my knowledge, they're there for a couple of years before they'll move them out to something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was just thinking that's a lot of engineering overhead for something that's in theaters for a couple months.
Oh,
But
yeah, they're
that makes more
definitely not.
sense.
The original experience for these films are still like that's how people primarily experience it, even in those countries. But 4D cinema is just kind of taken a bit more of a grasp. I believe 3D movies are also more popular there.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's just kind of like an extension of that. If you really like Avatar, it might be cool to experience the same movie again, but this time they spray water on your face.
And your chair moves around.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that like these are, to us are obviously like very gimmicky novel experiences, but I just kind of want to dispel the belief that like a novel gimmicky experience has to be inherently bad.
Right. I would have never thought of it kind of in a more refined sense if you hadn't brought that up.
Yeah. I think that when you experience those things for the first time, it's a unique, cool experience, even if it is a gimmick.
Right. When we come back, the ultimate musical gimmick, the novelty record. Welcome back to Are We Doing This Right on WEGL 91.1 Auburn.
All right, so we're talking about Novelty Records.
Yeah, Novelty Records. So this can be kind of a very nebulous definition. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say novelty record?
Not exactly.
So I wanted to give it a really kind of a standard definition before we really got too far into the segment. I think the easiest one is that it's a record that you would never expect to gain like hit status or very wide notoriety that just happens to. So something that was intended for comedy or just not intended to be taken very seriously in general.
Kind of like a niche product.
Exactly. And that definition will get more clear as we get into some of the examples later on in the segment.
All right.
And I also wanted to say one thing before we get into it that'll make a lot more sense as I get through it. But I think to look at the history and the kind of iterations of the novelty record is a history of popular music. And that sounds really pretentious when I say it out loud, but I think it's more accurate than you might realize.
All
right. Makes sense. So, time for ancient history of the United States. Let's go to the 1920s.
Oh boy.
So the first kind of novelty songs came off of Tin Pan Alley. And do you know what that term means?
No, I don't.
So Tin Pan Alley was where all the musical publishing was in New York City. It was mainly for musical theater and kind of rode off the backs of vaudeville. So it was just comedy songs and stuff like that. But this was the first kind of widespread distribution of popular music. This was when the record was starting to be a widespread thing in people's homes, and you didn't just have to go see things live. Before this, popular music certainly existed, but this was a new era for it.
Absolutely.
This is also kind of one of those things where people expect a lot of stuff to just be like, oh, it was the 1920s. People were only listening to big band jazz and nothing else, and that's just not true. And this is a prime example of that. A lot of people were listening to these comedy songs or these excerpts from musicals, and they were extremely popular, but they're left out of a lot of people's perceptions of history.
I guess because they're not traditional music.
Right, exactly. And they maybe don't have as much depth or interest for a lot of people. Like I had an English teacher in high school that said comedy doesn't track over time. And I think that's very much the case here. Like we may not see it as much or find it as funny as they would have back then.
That makes sense. A lot of it was relevant to the era.
Absolutely. Beyond that, when you really start seeing it come back again is the late 50s and the early 60s. Now, the late 50s and the early 60s are really important in this kind of, in both pop music and novelty songs, which are, again, pretty much the same. The big thing with the late 50s is that you're coming off of traditional rock and roll and things like Chubby Checker, Fats Domino, all them. A lot of pop music is dance fads, things like that. It's very kind of glittery and not superfluous, but
a little over the top.
Not even over the top, just like it doesn't take itself too seriously. It's very much like, we're just going to have fun. This music is not that big of a deal.
Not trying to make a statement or anything.
Exactly. 1958 is also what I would consider a really important one because that's when the Billboard 100 starts being kept. So we have a way to quantify popular music in a way that we didn't before that.
You can tell what people were listening to.
Exactly. And in 1958, you're coming off of that traditional rock and roll and you start ending up into the first kind of big peak of novelty songs. In 1958 alone, you have 6 top 5 singles that are novelty songs.
Did you say 6 top 5?
In 1 year. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
4 of those were number 1. And this is stuff like The Witch Doctor, the original Alvin and the Chipmunks Christmas song.
Yeah, those are definitely novelty.
Things like that, and stuff that you wouldn't really expect to be hits, but they sold in this case, literal tons of records.
That's insane.
Things like that. And this first explosion leads kind of into the early 60s, right? So you've got that kind of same prevailing mood. You're still doing this. And again, this is not the only thing that people were listening to, obviously.
Yeah.
Just because they were hits. And people tend to think that, and even I thought going into this that, it peaked in the 60s and it wasn't really a thing. And then it was a thing in the 80s for a little bit. And then it wasn't a thing again. But that's also not true.
I'm sure they've kind of always existed.
They continued peaking and they continued selling tons and tons of records. It stops being as big of a facet in the mid 60s when the British invasion starts happening. So you get bands like the Beatles and all that, and people stop paying as much attention to novelty songs, but you still had tons and tons of them. And then we get to a little bit less ancient history. The 1970s.
Oh boy.
Yeah, the 70s and the kind of popularity of disco was, again, one of these very non-serious, we're just going to listen to music to have fun kind of times.
Yeah, of course.
And so you had things like Disco Duck, which is awful, and I'm not going to play it on the air. It's not a good song.
I'll take your word for
But
it.
again, it peaked at number 1.
Just because I guess it just kind of fit with what, I don't know. It fit with what people wanted to hear, or at least what people found amusing.
Right, it was just dance music. It didn't have to be that lyrically deep
Yeah.
and a lot of things like that. I think the nature of this entire thing fundamentally changes when you hit the 80s, though. Because in the 80s, it stops being kind of a story of one-hit wonders. All these up until this point, you didn't really make much of a career out of novelty songs.
Yeah.
And then cultural juggernaut Weird Al comes on the scene.
Of course.
And this guy had many, many, many hits. Well, not many. He had 5 or 6 hits out of like parody songs and things like that,
Yeah.
making fun of current pop culture.
He kind of defined the modern era of that kind of song, the novelty song.
Right. He changed our ideas of novelty songs into this doesn't have, again, it's still very much non-serious, but it no longer has to be just some weird thing that comes out of the blue and never heard from again.
Yeah.
It becomes kind of a commentary on the culture in Weird Al's own particular style.
Yeah.
He was actually originally going to be the intro for this song, but we're fixing our computer systems at WEGL next week.
Yeah.
And again, people think that it stopped in the 1980s. It did not, of course.
Yeah.
It keeps going, and in the 2000s. Novelty hits are sparser as I think, taste in pop music diversifies and becomes different and wider and wider and wider over time.
As people had more like ability to listen to what they wanted to listen to, I think music tastes probably diverged a little bit more.
Right. The more accessible music is, the more encompassing that pop can be as I don't even really want to call it a genre, as like a meta genre, which
Yeah.
also sounds really pretentious coming out of my mouth, but you get the idea.
Exactly.
Now, in the U.S., we kind of left most of our novelty songs by the wayside. There were a couple outliers, things like the Crazy Frog song in the mid-2000s, things like that. Yeah, I see you squinting. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
You just brought me back to an era I didn't want to relive.
Yeah, a lot of it's fueled by the internet at this point. So we don't see as many Billboard hits because they don't pay attention to streams or YouTube views or anything like that. But
That's
they
the
still...
platform of novelty songs these
Absolutely.
days.
And it's become this weird decentralized thing where people are very much still listening to this kind of music, but it's not a hit in the same quantifiable sense that it was in the late 20th century.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I've been very U.S.-centric this entire segment. That's leaving out our other favorite cultural juggernaut, the United Kingdom.
Oh boy.
So for the second show in a row, we can go to our friends across the pond.
Not again.
Not again. Hey, you didn't complain when we talked about intellectual property law for 3 straight weeks last semester, so
That's true.
I'm going to keep bringing up the UK. So the UK had the same kind of peak of novelty songs that we had in the 80s. They didn't do the same thing with us in the 60s, but in the 80s, there were a lot of novelty songs. You can thank them for like the version of the chicken dance that you're probably familiar with. That was a
That's them?
number 1 hit in the United Kingdom.
I kind of hate that.
Yeah. British people, their novelty songs are much more time focused. They have this either awesome or terrible tradition, depending on how you want to look at it, called the Christmas number 1, where during the week of Christmas, I don't know if they use Billboard or not. I don't know how their number 1s are quantified. But in the week leading up to Christmas and on Christmas Day, what song gets the number 1 is kind of very paid attention to a point where people are like rooting for it and kind of watching it very closely and trying to manipulate the system and change things.
They use it as an opportunity to get like a novelty song to the top of the charts.
Right. It's like, we're going to get this out of our system and then not pay attention to for the rest of the year.
Okay.
And manipulating the system, things like Rage Against the Machine, a band that would not be expected to be the Christmas number 1, had a number 1 hit in 2009 with Killing in the Name. Just by manipulating the system and using social media, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The 2 I want to highlight here are the 2000 Christmas number 1 hit, which I had to listen to last night, and again, will not ever be going over the air. And it was the Bob the Builder theme
That got the Christmas #1 in the UK.
I Yeah, in a way. It was the Bob the Builder theme with this awful breakbeat going on in the background and electric guitar playing power chords along with it. So it was just this terrifying remix of a children's show theme that sold millions of pounds in currency of records. Like, Britton, what is going on? Are you okay?
That's terrifying.
And it's like, it's exactly what it sounds like. I'm at a loss for words for how to describe how this doesn't make any sense to me at all. I don't know how you pull this off.
That's insane. It's like those kinds of internet polls that you see getting hijacked, but just on like a nation scale.
Yeah. It seems like it's one of those weird things where I'm sure it made sense in the cultural context. Like, I'm sure there was some campaign around this of people basically messing with the system, but I don't know. I can't find anything telling me why. It's just, hey, this happened. And the other one I want to talk about is the most recent one, which is, I don't want to call it terrible for a reason I'll get to in a second. But the most recent one was a parody of We Built This City, but instead of saying rock and roll, they said sausage rolls. So it was just a classic rock parody entirely centered around food, with the back line of the guy not being able to sing and having to bring in his wife to do vocals and auto-tuning it. Now, the reason I don't want to call it terrible and the reason it actually got #1 status is all the money from the record was going to a children's charity.
Well, that's really nice of them.
So that at least makes sense. Like, okay,
it redeems it.
It's a song with a cause, but at the same time, it's a parody of We Built This City based around the idea of sausage rolls.
Yeah, not exactly my favorite, but it sounds like they did some good.
So just to summarize, the UK. I love you. I want the best for you. I don't understand your music.
That's very strange.
Okay. When we come back, the gimmicks of crowdfunding.
All right, and we're back. So we're going to talk a little bit about strange, good, and bad things that have come from crowdfunding.
I'm very excited.
We're going to focus primarily on Kickstarter, just because Kickstarter was the first major player in the crowdfunding space. And so how that even happened, they launched in 2009, but the reason why they succeeded and others didn't was because they had like a really solid mobile app. And this was at a time where no big company was really doing that. I still feel like most big companies don't know how to make a proper mobile app, but
yeah, Kickstarter's Snapchat.
Yeah, Kickstarter was polished, and that's really all it took to get people on this platform. And so you started seeing a lot of really good and really bad ideas popping up because everyone really wanted to make their money or like pass on this idea that they were passionate about. You got all sorts of different people.
Right, exact. It was very much kind of product spaghetti.
So I'm going to go through some Kickstarters, talk about them a little bit. But first, I want to ask you for each one if you thought that it got like successfully funded or it didn't.
Ooh, we haven't done a game in a while.
We haven't. Okay. So the first one, you probably have heard of it, but it was called The Coolest Cooler. Their goal was like $2.5 million, and they wanted to make a cooler with a built-in speaker, bottle opener, and blender.
Oh, I think it got funded.
It did get funded. And just a disclaimer, I actually kind of like this product, even though I don't necessarily, well, the company behind it is a little bit of a mess. Mm-hmm. But there's some inherent issue with the design. For one, you can't, like, I think the original plan was to have like a basic cooling system that ran off the solar panel. Obviously, a tiny solar panel on top of a cooler is not going to generate nearly enough electricity to pull that off.
Right, and for everyone that hasn't seen this, the coolest cooler was kind of the idea of an ultimate beach cooler. So you'd have a solar panel on the top. I think you could run a blender. It was intended to be electric cooling, that kind of thing.
They did finish manufacturing it. They charged $185 on the Kickstarter for the base model. They did not, it still uses traditional insulation methods of cooling like any other cooler, but it did have the solar panel. It had optional support for a blender. But they got into some big trouble because even though they charged $185 for their Kickstarter backers, Each model actually cost them $235 to produce.
Oh wow.
So
I
at
don't think that works.
launch, they were massively in debt. And the real issue here came from the fact that they were never able to fulfill their backer orders. As of now, like a week ago, there's still quite a few people who haven't gotten their coolest cooler.
That seems to be kind of an unfortunate story of many, many Kickstarters.
Yeah. On the bright side, partially because the Portland police have ordered them after an investigation for fraud, the products do actually exist. They are being manufactured, and a bit at a slow rate. The people who backed it are finally getting their coolest cooler 6 years late.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow.
the next one, are you familiar with the Pebble watch?
Yeah, I never had one, but I remember when they came out.
Yeah, so I guess we already know that this one was a Kickstarter success. This was, I guess, one of the few examples that seemed relatively drama-free. I just picked it out because I recognized the name. These kind of preceded the modern smartwatch. When the Pebble watch was first kickstarted, you didn't have anything like the Samsung or the Apple smartwatches we have now. They weren't even really beginning to be developed. Pebble kind of paved the way in that aspect.
Right. It was kind of the first to market, and it was working out some of the early kinks in the whole like concept of a smartwatch.
Exactly. They had qualified people on their team, and they made an actual product. But unfortunately, even though they delivered everything, they were turning a profit. Eventually, they went bankrupt, and I think 2 years ago, they got acquired by Fitbit.
Right. And I think that if I remember correctly, Fitbit just recently like shut the brand down. Like I don't
Yeah.
think they manufacture watches anymore, unfortunately.
They don't, but they use the technology and some of the engineers behind the original device to make Fitbit now. So
Right.
no one got scammed this time. All right, so the next one. Are you familiar with the city? I think it's pronounced Minas Tirith from Lord of the Rings.
Somewhat, yeah.
This giant, huge city. Well, these group of architects got together and they decided they wanted to try and kickstart the actual to-scale Minas Tirith
Oh God,
at a low price of 1.85 billion euros.
that even seems like a low estimate for building an entire gigantic city.
A little bit. Do you think it got funded?
I want to believe in my heart, no.
It did not, fortunately.
Okay, thankfully.
Um,
Some people are smart. Some
yeah,
people.
they actually did raise 85,000 euros, but of course that money didn't go anywhere because if a product is not if it does not reach the goal that it's eligible for, then the people who back it get their money back.
Right, and there are some platforms that will do that. I think Indiegogo you can set it up to just give you whatever you raise in the campaign.
Yeah, fortunately, the people who donated to this one did get their refunds. So another one you might have heard of is the Air umbrella. Do you think
Describe
that this
that
got
to me.
funded? Okay,
know what it
basically,
is.
instead you have a metal rod that it's kind of like those bladeless fans at the top where it shoots air to kind of act as a sort of umbrella by blowing the rain away from you before it can hit you. So it's an invisible umbrella, effectively.
I can't see what possible way that product idea could have any flaws that would make it not work as well as they expect.
So this actually, it did get funded. However, at no point in their video did they ever show a functioning prototype.
Of course.
At no point did they even talk about having a functional prototype. And days after the Kickstarter got funded for, I think, $100,000, the creator fell off the face of the earth for 4 years, only to come back and say, "Oh, sorry, I'm working on getting you a refund."
Yeah,
I think it goes without saying that no one got any money from that. The prototype was never created, and even if it was created, in order for the air to be strong enough to protect the person holding the umbrella from the rain, it would propel the rain at such high velocities around, like at the people around you, that they would get like seriously injured.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things with I watch Kickstarter kind of closely. I watch some of these inventions that seem a little bit out there. It's just that whole genre of campaigns where it's just, we have a concept video, it'll probably work. I mean, it's your money, go for it. And it's just like, y'all
Don't spend money on this.
think about this for a little bit. This doesn't make sense.
Yeah, unfortunately, there were a lot of very, very passionate believers in the Air umbrella, but It doesn't look like
Oh.
that's ever going to make a return.
Yeah.
All right, our next product. This is technically cheating because this one was on Indiegogo. I believe it violated some Kickstarter term of use. This one is called the Strap and Crap. You tie it around a tree and lean into it. So if you're going to the restroom, you're safe, I guess, in the forest. I'm not exactly sure what purpose it served. Do you think it got funded?
I hope not.
Yeah, luckily this one did not reach its $8,000 goal. It only raised $4,000 for what was basically just a nylon band that you wrapped around a tree.
We need to move on from that one.
All
No.
right. So next, arguably a worse product. So this one was called, I think, Enduritus, and it was a fallout shelter planned to be built in Canada that could hold 300 people. The catch is it doesn't matter how much you donate, you don't get a spot in.
It's just saying, oh yeah, we can build it.
Yeah. Do you think it got funded?
I hope not.
They raised $1.
Yeah.
They got a lot of media coverage. This idea was very popular.
And they raised $1.
Yep. The creator was later found on a GoFundMe. Apparently, he had started one to raise money so that he could stop living inside a van. Evidently, the fallout shelter didn't work out.
Was this the one that was proposed to be like built out of buried school buses?
No, but you have me confused and alarmed.
I vaguely remember something about that. That's off topic.
That sounds about right. So another one, this was called Scarp. It was a laser razor, which is a really cool band name, but a really terrible idea for a product. At no point did they have a working prototype. And so this was in like 2016, at the point when Kickstarter realized that their brand was hurting because of so many failed Kickstarters, and they started requiring prototypes.
Right.
So they got funded on Kickstarter. The entire Kickstarter was taken down. Everyone got their money back. And then, of course, they do the logical thing. They make an Indiegogo, in which case they did get funded again because people fell for this. And as of right now, they are still fine-tuning the lasers on their product. It does cut hair, however, really slowly, and you got to like hold it in one spot. And it's not really a razor. But maybe it'll turn into something.
I have a fun tip for any product that contains lasers and claims to cut stuff. Lasers are big.
Yeah.
They're bigger than a razor if you want them to cut hair, I promise.
Well, that won't stop people from spending money on what sounds cool.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So, you've probably heard of this one. This, rather than a physical product, there's a couple of games that that at least tried to get kickstarted. Are you familiar with Star Citizen?
Peripherally.
This is one of, if you don't count blockchain, like crowdsourcing, which apparently is a thing. If you like mining cryptocurrency, that qualifies as crowdfunding. But regarding traditional crowdfunding, Star Citizen is the most funded crowdsourcing project.
How much did they get?
On Kickstarter, they got $2 million, and then they moved to an external site where they're currently sitting at, I think, $220 million.
Wow.
Yeah. Star Citizen is basically this idea of a giant open world space game. That's putting it simply. It's meant to be this ultra complicated simulation that people can effectively live in. And they started development in 2012, said it was going to be ready in 2014. Rough estimates now look like maybe 2025. They spent a lot of the budget hiring Mark Hamill of Star Wars fame to act as a voice actor. So we'll see how that turns out. But I felt it was worth mentioning considering how large and how popular it was.
Yeah, that is kind of, it does seem like a similar story arc of, yeah, we'll be ready now. Yeah, we'll be ready in 2025.
Yeah,
We promise.
we'll see. At least they are developing a product. They didn't just run with the money like the Air umbrella.
Right.
Briefly, I want to talk about just a few successful Kickstarters that didn't have a scandal somehow.
Oh, good.
Cards Against Humanity was a Kickstarter.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
They raised $14,000. They only needed 10. And obviously, we all know Cards Against Humanity today.
Mhm.
Exploding Kittens, I think, is the most crowdfunded card game on Kickstarter. Maybe board game as well. If you might have seen that in like Books A Million and other stores, if those still exist. A few indie games, Hollow Knight, Shovel Knight, Faster Than Light. I'm starting to see a pattern in these titles.
Right.
Those are all three critically acclaimed games. They raised a little bit of money. They made a product. They called it a day. No major scandals. And perhaps at least now, the most famous Kickstarter product, the Oculus Rift, got acquired by a little company called Facebook for $2 billion after the Kickstarter was successful. And they did deliver their project. Nowadays, Kickstarter's focusing on kind of trying to fix their brand after so many failed prototypes and projects that don't go anywhere. That's about it.
All right. When we come back, the rise and fall of 360 video. Welcome back. Before I get into this segment, I just want to say a little disclaimer about this segment and also about last segment. We're going to talk about a lot of products here. We are not sponsored or affiliated in any way with any of them. This show is not sponsored or advertised on in any way as per our license agreement. I just want to make that clear for anyone listening, just, covering,
We're just talking about brands. We're not recommending them.
Right. And that's important because our next segment is 360 video.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Before I really get into 360 video, I want to talk about one of the kind of ancient history precursors. That was Disney's Circle Vision 360.
Hey, that's not ancient.
Yeah.
Okay,
Trust
it's been
me, it
around
is.
for a while, but it's still there.
It's 1960s video. It's ancient.
All right.
So Circle Vision was this thing that was originally meant for like expos and in building the Disney theme parks. And it was a system of 9 cameras and projectors that would film a entirely circular panoramic video. And so the only modern iteration that still exists is in Disney's Epcot in Canada, or in the Canada Pavilion, I should say. In Canada, presented in Circle Vision 360.
It's a classic.
Right, it's a classic, but it's just one of these weird things. But it has that very old Disney appeal to it. It's very much a, look what we can do with this new technology, and look at these other cultures that we can see and kind of appreciate. It's
very experimental.
Mm-hmm. And the weird thing is that, you would have thought this entire thing was kind of going away or on the downslope. And for a long time it was. It used to be a big thing. There was one in every single of Disney's parks, every single one of the four areas of Disney World in Orlando. And it got reduced all the way down until the only one left was in Epcot. But they recently built a new digitized version of the technology.
Interesting.
And I think that could be spurred on by the kind of cultural awareness and the rise and fall of 360 video.
The rise and fall? It's already fallen?
Yeah, it's okay. We'll get to that part, okay? I promise.
All right.
So 360 video, as we're going to be talking about it here, and just so you know, if you follow us on Twitter at AWDTRpod, you'll be able to see the 360 video filming of this episode.
We're recording it in 360-degree video, and we'll have it posted online.
It's the world's most just useful use of this technology.
Oh, boy.
To film a radio show. But the way I'm talking about here is, spherical video. So this is video that's effectively a panorama that you can go all the way up and down, and the viewers will basically crop in so that you can use your phone or maybe a VR headset to look around and effectively change your viewpoint on the scene, even though there's only one camera.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked about this segment a little bit. I know you have some opinions about the use of, or just calling it VR in this context. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think that you see a lot of, big companies hop on board with the buzzword of look, it's experience this in virtual reality. But I wouldn't really call 360-degree video virtual reality because quite often it's in 2D. And I feel like virtual reality that's in 2D is just, barely even considered virtual reality.
It's pleb tier.
Exactly. And even with the rise of, you now have cameras that the lenses are slightly offset so you can get 3D 360-degree video, but it still lacks interactivity at all. You can't move. I think it's not any sort of reality because it's constant. You can't change anything. You can't even change your position. All you can change is where you're looking.
Right. And I'd say that's pretty much valid.
That doesn't mean 360-degree video is useless, but if companies could stop calling it virtual reality, that'd be great.
Yeah. And just Ezra has plenty of street cred in this area. You can tweet at him if you want to talk about it.
Right.
Before I get into the kind of rise and fall, as I've been wanting to call it here, I want to talk a little bit how this is achieved and why it's only been really able to be achieved recently. And I think that comes down to the size and quality of the cameras. So there's two main ways to pull this off. In our case, and in the case of the lower end, it's effectively two action cameras stuck back to back.
So that's what that is.
Yeah, so Chinese companies, Chinese electronics manufacturers, they sell a lot of action cameras after like the GoPro was invented, and it's not, I won't say trivial, but it's not that hard from a manufacturing standpoint to just basically stick two of those together with wider angle lenses and then stitch those together in post.
It's kind of an iteration of technology that we've already had.
Effectively, yeah, and that's a lot of how this is. It's repurposed current technology. The other way you do it, if you want higher quality, and if you're watching the 360 version of this, you'll notice that it's kind of grainy and low res. That's because what we're doing with the two cameras is effectively sticking two HD cameras back to back. But in order to get that kind of movable viewpoint, you have to crop in a lot on the video. So your end resolution is a lot lower. If you want higher resolution, basically the trick is more cameras.
Yeah.
The most common system for this was GoPro's Omni, which is a rig that would stick 6 GoPro, I think 4s were the last time they did it, back to back and in a spherical configuration. But that effectively gave you a lot more resolution for the spherical video.
Yeah.
That rig would cost about $2,000 versus what this one, where I got it for, I think, $99 on sale. But the quality difference is insane.
Yeah, 6 versus 2. It doesn't take much math to realize one of them is going to be better than the other.
The issue is with the way that most of these are hosted, even with the higher quality, it still doesn't look as good as just a normal 1080p video because you have to still compress and store what is effectively now 6 streams of that video stitched together.
It's a lot more data.
Right, so you suffer bitrate problems, so the end video will look grainier and maybe not as nice, even if it does have the resolution. Not all 1080p is equal and the same.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the rise, it's 2015. Things are going great. Ezra and I are in high school and can't afford 360 cameras. But
those were the days.
Effectively, I would say this is the peak of kind of cultural awareness of 360 video.
Google Cardboard and stuff like that were pretty popular.
Yeah, and that's for a couple reasons. So you have the cheaper cameras entering the market. So like the camera I have now entered the market in 2015. Things like the Ryko Theta S, which is arguably better than that one, and it is very slim and small and makes about the same quality 360 video, enters the market in 2015. In 2015, you also have YouTube adding support natively for 360 video and being able to see it on your phone and on Google Cardboard, like you said.
I remember that was a game changer, especially people just looking at it through their phone, like the novelty of it.
Right, and that's still how a lot of people will see it. That's how I watch it whenever I watch 360 video on YouTube.
It's just most accessible.
And this is also when Google came out with their very low price VR headsets called the Google Cardboard, which I know you've used quite a lot, but if you don't know, it's effectively a foldable piece of cardboard that you attach your phone to and has lenses for the eyes that make it kind of a lo-fi, low-end VR headset.
It had basic tracking because it uses the gyro in your phone, so you could look at the 360-degree video by like turning your head actually around, and it felt more, I guess, natural than like waving your phone all over the place.
Right, but if you had never tried it before, it was... For that first time of I've never worn a VR headset before or anything like that, this would have been revolutionary.
It lets anyone dip their toes in because the headsets were like $5, $10 since they were using your phone.
Absolutely, and that kind of brings the whole same mood with 360 video that most consumers had. It was, this is brand new. What can we do with this? The quality doesn't matter. This is so cool just as a format.
The novelty of it.
And that was what was so exciting. I was following a couple indie filmmakers at the time who got some of those lower end 360 cameras, and seeing what you could do with it was amazing. I wasn't concerned with quality, but
it's a whole new medium for people to discover.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what's, I think, is still so cool about it. But the problem is time happens, and as you get accustomed to this being a thing in the world and the novelty wears off, you start to see some of the flaws. Like I mentioned earlier, the bitrate going down, even on high quality 360, is very noticeable and kind of degrades the experience of watching the videos when you have to stream them, like most people do.
Yeah.
Most of the time, the average person is not going to have these downloaded on their computer or have software to view them, anything like that.
Even the highest resolution of them on YouTube, I've noticed, is still quite low.
Absolutely. And you start running into filmmakers realize that while the storytelling potentials of these are really, really interesting and things like that, and you can still do a whole lot with them, it's much harder to tell stories when you can't control where the camera is looking.
People will often just like look around at a wall or something, and they're not going to notice what someone's saying if they're trying to make like a movie. And so if people don't have to pay attention, they won't.
Absolutely. A lot of I would say the role of being a director is controlling what the audience is seeing and controlling them, moving the story forward. And this is a problem when people were bringing up things like games and movies in VR. Games, you have objectives to move the story forward, even if there aren't many long-form story formats in VR games yet.
Yeah.
Would you say that's accurate?
That sounds about right.
Yeah. So, but with movies, that's not the case. It's hard to get people to look where you want them to look, and it's hard to tell a story like that.
There aren't any sort of, like with a VR game that's telling a story, you can wait until the player like looks at a certain thing or moves to a certain position before you show the next story beat. But if it's a video, you don't have that level of control. It just is constantly playing.
Absolutely. And so after that kind of initial peak in cultural excitement about it, that I'm honestly sad to see go, and people realizing the flaws, it kind of declines a lot because it's hard to use the format.
Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if perhaps it made a return once it's a little bit more accessible.
Right.
And particularly in viewing.
Yeah, it's become relegated to this, the action camera market once again, kind of took it back because it is still very useful in that sentence from somebody having something like on a helmet cam or something like that.
Yeah. I know they streamed the Olympics, I think 2016, or I think it was 2016, in 360-degree video with like GoPros on like a snowboarder's helmet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that's really novel. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and that's, again, it's finding applications where it doesn't matter where the viewer is looking. Now, this is, weirdly enough, I initially called this the fall, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think this is weirdly enough where we've hit, so far, the best iteration of 360 video.
I think it's probably fallen in popularity, though.
Right, and I think the one kind of last bastion of 360 video as a consumer product for most people to be able to take it is the GoPro Fusion. Have you ever heard of this?
I haven't.
Okay, so effectively what GoPro did, if I remember correctly, is they stuck two action cameras back to back. They took two Hero 5s, which are very high quality, very high resolution cameras, and stuck them back to back into what's called the Fusion. The Fusion also has on board accelerometers, tilt sensors, everything like that, so it knows which way it's pointed and which way the ground is.
So they can stabilize it.
Exactly. And what it becomes is not something that's intended to show people spherical video all the time. It becomes a camera that you don't have to point, which is, I think, the most interesting and useful use of this technology so far for like mass consumption.
So they record what they're doing and then they go back later and turn it into a regular video because they already have all the angles.
And the resolution on the sensors is high enough that when it crops down, it still looks just as good as a 1080p GoPro video. And I think that's what the biggest outcome of this has been, even though that camera is still $600 and hardly what I would consider accessible for most people. I think that's the future of this whole scene.
Yeah, if you can record something that's happening in the moment and then later go back and
just point it wherever you want.
Yeah.
I've seen this. My favorite use of this that I've seen was on a video by a YouTuber named Tom Scott, which he's one of my favorites. I would love to see him get checked out more. But he did a video on the United States Air Force's Vomit Comet, so the 360, or not the 360, the zero gravity plane that they use. It flies in basically outlining a sine wave.
Yeah.
And so he placed one in the cabin, stuck to one of the windows with the pilots. And what you could do was that you'd still have that perfect 360 video and the entire thing could tilt over so you could show the plane tilting in video like you wouldn't have been able to before. And I think it looks incredibly cool in the video. I'll tweet that out after the show so that y'all can see it if you'd like.
That's interesting.
But it's so much cooler than the 2015 version of 360 video. Like, I called that the peak, but it's not the peak. It was the early adoption.
Yeah, that was like the initial peak in popularity, and then now the technology is getting refined, and
Yeah.
we might see a return later as more practical uses like that happen.
In one of those weird ways, in getting past the novelty and getting past the gimmick, we have found a much cooler use of this technology that I'm very, very excited about.
I
Yeah.
guess gimmicks do pay off.
Yep.
Unless they're Shrek 4D.
Or Kickstarter.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. That's our show this week. Next week, we're going to be talking. Actually, we're not going to say what we're going to be talking about next week. You'll have to listen and find out.
All right.
You can listen to the show every Friday from 2 to 3 on WEGL 91.1 in Auburn or WEGLFM.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at AWDTRpod. That's AWDTR as in Are We Doing This Right? We'll be posting the videos and from now on, videos of just our normal faces so you don't have to sit through 360. I'm
Bless.
Grayson.
I'm Ezra.
And this has been Are We Doing This Right?
See y'all next time.